Call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the Committee of Adjustment meeting of February 12th, 2019. Thank you for braving the storm. My name is Mario Russo, Committee Chair. This is a Committee of Adjustment meeting. The Committee of Adjustment is composed of 5 citizen members who are appointed by Brampton City Council. The committee is authorized by the Ontario Planning Act to consider applications for minor variances from the provisions of the City of Brampton zoning bylaw. The committee also considers applications for consent, sometimes referred to as land division applications, which include severing a new lot from an existing lot, a lot addition, easements, mortgages, or leases in excess of 21 years. My first request is to ask those present to ensure that all cell phones and other electronic devices are turned off or placed in a non-audible mode during the meeting. I'd like to first introduce the committee members. To my immediate right, member Mr. Ron Chadha. To my far right, member Mr. Richard Nurse. To my immediate left, member Ms. Desiree Doffler. And to my far left, member Mr. Robert Crouch. And again, my name is Mario Russo. Seated at the table in front of the committee, or to the side of the committee, is Ms. Jeannie Myers, Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. And seated near the podium, we have city staff members who will assist with the committee today. Staff, can I please get your introductions?
Daniel Watchhorn, Development Planner.
I'm Elizabeth Corzola, Manager of Zoning Services.
Kevin Freeman, Development Planner.
Adam Farr, Manager, Development Review.
David Vandenberg, Central Area Planner.
Thank you. Before we consider today's applications, the committee has some procedural matters to take care of. Firstly, the adoption of minutes. Minutes of the meeting held January 22nd, 2019. The minutes of the previous meeting are presented in today's agenda. Committee members, any questions or concerns about these minutes? May I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 22nd, 2019 as presented? Motion by Mr. Nurse. Seconded by Mr. Chadha. All in favor? That carries. They are approved. We move on to declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Does any member have a declaration of pecuniary interest to declare on any matter being discussed today? None? Seeing none? We move on to withdrawals and deferrals. We do have one written request that I've seen for A18-179, 27 Church Street in Brampton. There is a written request for a deferral to the June 18th meeting. Are the agents here?
Members of the committee. My name is Hannah Bamanpour. I appear as counsel on behalf of the owners at 27 Church Street East. Since the last committee meeting, we've had the opportunity to meet with staff from Heritage, Zoning, and Planning to discuss the possibility of a resolution to bring our client's property into compliance with the zoning bylaw. We've been advised that our client's required to submit a heritage permit application as the property is designated as heritage. The next Heritage Board meeting to consider the application is March 19th. Therefore, we have to submit our application by February 26th, 3 weeks in advance of the meeting date. At that point, if approved by the Heritage Board, it would go to the next council meeting for council's consideration. I was advised of that yesterday by legal counsel at the City of Brampton. And so in order to bring the property into compliance and implement the proposal, if acceptable to staff and council, we would require some time to do the necessary work. So that, we've asked for it to be put off until June 18th, although we're hopeful that we wouldn't have to appear here again and can resolve it.
Okay, thank you so much. I do note the staff recommendations concur with that, but staff, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't really have anything to add. We support the request for the deferral.
Committee members, any questions or discussion on the item? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none? Okay, to the June 18th meeting, sir? Okay. Seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? That carries. This is deferred to the June 18th meeting.
Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. We don't have, I do not see any other written requests for deferrals or withdrawals. Is there anyone in the audience here with any item that would like to request a deferral or a withdrawal? Seeing none? Quickly, for those unfamiliar with the committee adjustment procedure and process, I'd like to give a brief explanation and scope. Following some procedural matters, which we have already undergone, the Secretary-Treasurer will then call the applications by announcing the application number, the name of the applicant, and the address of the property subject to the application. The applicant or authorized agent representing the applicant will then come down to the podium, state their name and address for the record, and then present the application. I request that you reserve any questions or comments pertaining to the staff report until after planning staff has had an opportunity to present. If there's anyone in attendance who wishes to speak to a particular application, you will be given the opportunity to do so when the application is presented. Any decision made here today may be appealed to the Local Planning Appeal Board, Tribunal, LPAT. Previously, the appeal process was dealt through the Ontario Municipal Board. However, the province has introduced new legislation in the form of Bill 139, which came into force April 3rd, 2018. Appeals received in the City Clerk's office associated with minor variance and consent applications will be processed and forwarded to the LPAT, as they were previously processed and sent to the OMB. This process may be commenced with the Secretary-Treasurer by filing a completed appeal form and filing fee within the prescribed 20-day appeal period. Information pertaining to the appeal process may be obtained by contacting the Secretary-Treasurer within the City Clerk's office. We now move on to new consent applications.
Calling application A19020, Village Acres Limited. Property is located at 15 Reagan Road.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members
morning,
of
sir.
the committee. My name is Colin Chung of Glen Schnarr & Associates. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. The property subject to this variance is 15 Regan Road. It's just north of Beauvais Drive in North Brampton. It's an existing industrial property. It has an existing industrial building. It's a very unique property, Mr. Chairman, in a way that it has a frontage on Regan Road, and the rear yard also fronts on the rear yard to Van Kirk Drive. South of this property, there's an existing Honda dealership, and this property has been used by Honda dealership as for their overflow of vehicles onto the backyard of this property. So this application, Mr. Chairman, is a reapplication. I believe this is the third one. We sought for 5-year temporary variance and other variances to facilitate the Honda dealership from continuing to park their overflow vehicles on this property. I will speak to the staff report, I guess, after staff presents the report.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any questions by committee members of the agent?
Chair. Mr. Chung, this application's been in front of the committee 2 or 3 times before, and yet your client has failed to fulfill any of the landscape conditions. Why should we approve it again?
I'll speak on the conditions that staff are applying to the variance, Mr. Chairman. It is our opinion that the conditions have been fulfilled. There's a bit of a, I guess, disconnect, miscommunication, and I can explain that. In terms of landscaping, one of the conditions of prior variance approval was to file a full site plan application. The owner had done that, obtained site plan approval. Part of that site plan approval did include a landscaping requirement. Subsequent to site plan approval, the owner and the former director of planning and the planner that was working on the file at the time, Dana Jenkins, had looked at the site plan, the landscaping plan, had resolved and I guess compromised on the landscaping treatment that modified from this approved site plan. We have documentation on that, so when staff talk about failing to comply, it's the owner's opinion through the site plan approval that they complied because there were further discussions that took place after site plan approval. I can also speak to, since this matter is before you, about the fencing along Van Kirk. There's been modification to the type of fencing that the staff required after site plan approval, and I have documentation in my file that confirms that. So in my opinion, I think because of the transition of different staff working on this property, I think the communication or resolution was lost in the shuffle, and I can explain that to you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Any further
I'll
questions?
wait to hear.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none? Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff reviewed the application against the forecasts outlined in the Planning Act and recommending approval in part, subject to 6 conditions of approval. Condition 1, that the variance be approved for a temporary period of 2 years from the date of the committee's decision. Condition 2, that the owner demonstrate to the satisfaction of the manager of open space and development that all vehicles stored within the required landscaped areas of the site have been removed within 60 days of the date of the committee's decision. 3, that the owner demonstrate to the satisfaction of the manager of open space and development that all landscape works have been implemented in accordance with the approved landscape plan within 120 days of the committee's decision. 4, that the owner demonstrate to the satisfaction of the manager of open space and development that a physical barrier has been installed sufficient to prevent vehicles from parking within the required landscaped areas of the site within 120 days of the committee's decision. 5, that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. And lastly, 6, that failure to comply with the maintained conditions of the committee will render the approval null and void.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions for staff?
Are you aware of what happened when Ms. Jenkins was reviewing the site plan application?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was not privy to those previous discussions. I can confirm that in conducting my site inspection that the landscape works have not been installed as per the approved landscape plan. And I've confirmed with the manager of open space and development that those landscape works should be implemented and to his satisfaction.
And there's no record of the conversations with Mr. Chung?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Any other questions at this point in time with staff? Mr. Chung?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate staff's recommendation for support with the conditions, but I do want to speak on some of the conditions, if I may. Maybe I'll skip the condition number 1, which is the period or the extent of the temporary period of the variance. But I'll go to number 3 and 4, which is dealing with the landscaping works and the physical barrier for delineating the parking area. So I spoke earlier about landscaping, which is reflected in staff condition number 3. Today, as you know, Mr. Chairman, under the site plan approval document, there are existing trees, large canopy trees that are planted along Banker Drive. That is existing today. That complies with site plan. The issue of non-compliance is the shrubbery that is reflected on the landscaping plan under the site plan approval. Certainly, we try to share documentation with staff who are not privy to the previous site plan approval, that there's documentation of scoping the shrubbery. And these are seasonal shrubbery. They don't, sometimes, they have to be replanted. And former director of planning, as well as Dana Jenkins, who's planner still residing at the city of Brampton, understood that there's a certain amount of shrubbery identified through the landscape plan that was approved that would be planted by the owner. The owner complied with that. If the owner did not comply at the time of site plan approval, the variance that was sought back in 2014 would have been null and void. So staff certainly cleared that that was satisfactory on the landscaping. I think the bone of contention today is that staff are relying upon the approved landscaping plan, which is superseded by a modified landscaping plan that was agreed to by former director as well as Dana Jenkins. And we have documentation to that. We tried to share it this morning with the manager of planning and Mr. Kevin Freeman. But in their file, they don't have that documentation. So all I'm trying to do today, it's not that I'm not...
Sorry to cut you off. Do you have that available for us at this moment?
Just the plan that I've given them is the one that was agreed to.
Just sorry, your name?
Oh, my name is Jennifer Armstrong. I'm the owner of Village Acres
Okay.
and the building at that site. On this plan, just to clarify, all the tall trees that have been marked in green that provide a barrier have been provided and have been there for probably 7-8 years now. The only thing really that is missing off of that plan is the low shrubbery along the front. There's a couple of trees, I think out of the 16 trees, we've put in 12 of the big ones, that's deciduous and coniferous, and there's maybe a couple missing. The ones missing on the end we agreed with the planner that they would not be installed because there was enough planting on both ends of the property to provide the same type of visual barrier per se. And as far as the fence, I agree sometimes that,
Let me do it.
oh, sorry, okay.
So let's do it the
Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, the image before you and the text that's on that image was culminated as a result of meeting with Dana Jenkins and the former Director of Planning, Jill Hogan. And we identified every shrubbery on the approved landscaping plan and identified those that need to be planted. And the owner had done that. I confirmed it. The city staff confirmed it. And that's the reason why at the time in 2014, the landscaping treatment that would be required was satisfied. All I'm trying to do today is, I understand the condition. I'm not trying to remove the condition, but I don't want to take away from the condition after potentially approval by this committee on the variance to find out that we have a miscommunication as to what was actually agreed to, what was committed to between the owner and the city with respect to what was actually modified. So all I'm seeking is that there should be some recognition on record that the approved site plan as modified, simply as modified, because there was further modification in terms of the discussions and agreement. In my opinion, Mr. Chairman, by doing that, that provides some clarity for the owner subsequent to potentially the approval of the committee of this variance to work out the details with staff without having this disconnect communication.
Thank you. From my point of view, I guess there is obviously been some correspondence. However, I'm comfortable with the fact that ongoing site plan will be reviewed and those discussions with the manager of open space will be able to be verified. Is that staff?
Through Mr. Chair, staff are prepared to meet with the manager of open space and the former planner and review the record. The condition as it's written says to the satisfaction of the manager. So we're glad to have a further discussion. Unfortunately, we just couldn't have a fulsome discussion prior to the meeting this morning.
Yeah, and the wording itself then.
So we're quite comfortable with the condition, and we'll work with the applicant to review the record, and if there's been some understanding, we'll recognize that pending those discussions.
Okay. Anything else from committee on Ms.
Just through you,
Stoffler?
Mr. Chair. Was there a permit issued for, normally, my understanding is that there's a permit that's issued with a drawing that's attached to it. Is this the drawing that would have been attached, or were there just discussions underway in terms of whether there's actually an approved plan or
So the,
simply discussions?
Mr. Chairman, the base plan that you see before you is the approved landscaping plan in black and white. Subsequent to the approval of the landscaping plan, there were further discussion with the director and the planner about implementing the landscaping. At the time, when this was approved and the amount of vegetation and landscaping that were required to be implemented, there were further discussions, negotiations subsequent to the approved landscaping plan. And there's been correspondence going back and forth, both verbal and written. And the document before you, which is on the slide, is the scoped landscaping treatment that staff indicated would be satisfactory to implement the approved landscaping plan. So,
And just, sorry, a further clarification, is the landscaping meant to screen the parked cars?
Mr. Chairman, twofold. Partly to provide some visual, barrier between parked cars and Vancouver Drive. As well, staff indicated to me, because I was part of the site plan process, that the landscaping was to beautify the, I call it the boulevard treatment of Vancouver Drive as well. So there's really for two reasons.
And staff concurs?
Yes, it would be for aesthetic purposes and for screening.
Thank you.
Anything further?
If I may deal with condition number 4, Mr. Chairman, which is dealing with fencing. Again, within the same context of discussions of how to implement the approved site plan, this is subsequent to site plan approval, there were discussion between the owner and the city on how to provide the physical barrier to demarcate the location of cars to be parked versus where cars could not be parked. So the approved site plan talk about pressure-treated post and chain. I have email exchange between the director of planning, former director, and our office that confirms that they have accepted and satisfied themselves of the same condition back in 2014, that the owner could implement post and chain barrier. So by putting post and chain barrier, it would actually augment the requirement under the site plan approval for demarcating the vehicles to be parked versus where the landscaping and the, I guess, open space ought to be protected. Simply, we're asking this condition, and we want to just make sure that we understand, because the disconnect between the staff who worked on previous applications, site plan application versus new staff, that when staff put this condition number 4 in, that they recognize that there have been discussions historically about how to demarcate it, and that the city accepted the post and chain barrier, which is installed, and that's a means to separate between the cars where the cars can park versus landscaping. We just want to make sure that that's on record, to understand that when we go through the process of clearing this condition, that staff recognize the history behind this one.
And again, from this is just my point of view, is these items, as you've indicated, perhaps are on record. But again, my comfort level is that these are discussions that, if and when this is approved, it is to the discretion of the manager of open space, that you can hopefully deal ongoing and provide the documentation to them and have that dialogue and clarify those issues. I think it's beyond the scope of this committee at this time to get into the details, other than I do appreciate it being brought up, because it does, I guess, augment our understanding of the issue.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I simply was seeking some clarity and confirmation from staff who provided this condition to the committee, that when in this conditions talks about, as an example, pressure-treated post and chain, that is not the requirement, that there's other ways to demarcate, and we had a solution back in 2014 for that. And, you know, as long as staff understand, recognize, acknowledge that, we're prepared to, you know, accept this condition. I just want to put it on record that there's history to this condition.
Okay, and staff, just to speak on that item, you're indicating an example, that's not the sole example from, or is that?
We'll review the correspondence, and we'll review the submissions that the applicant's consultant's mentioning, and pending those discussions and that review, we'll give appropriate consideration to that material.
Right, and I guess the question though is, when using the example, i.e. pressure-treated post and chain, from my point of view, that would not be the sole example that can be used, or is that the intent of staff at this point in time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the intent of the condition was to create a separation between the required landscape areas of the site and the parking area for the purpose of outside storage. There would be alternative means to come to effectively create that separation or physical barrier.
And from my perspective, that's the discussion that staff and the applicant would have
Correct.
at that point in time.
That's a discussion we can continue to have with the applicant and potentially come to a conclusion.
Any questions, committee members? Mr. Crouch?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so the post and chain that's already there, is it in the wrong spot?
It is located along the rear yard of the property, abutting Van Kirk, but it's not located within the side yard of the property. So when I tended the property, vehicles continue to park within the required side yard of the property, which is not permitted. So they would need to install that post and chain from the side yard of the property to prevent vehicles from parking within that space.
Thank you.
And that was indicated in the site plan from staff's perspective, and
I believe so. If not, then it became a condition of the 2009 decision, in which case it was apparent that vehicles continue to park within the required side yard of the property, and staff wanted to make sure that that no longer happened.
okay. And to the agent, that's discussion items that would be ongoing from your applicant's perspective as well? Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, as a final item then, I'll deal with condition number 1. The extent of the period of temporary variance. We filed an application for 5-year variance. Staff are recommending that the variance be 2 years. as I indicated earlier, this is an overflow parking usage by Honda dealership to the south of this property. It's a lease agreement between the owner and Honda dealership. By having 2 years, it really puts difficulty in securing a lease with Honda dealership for 2 years. So with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman and the committee, that we have filed for 5 years in our original application, recognizing what staff are trying to do, we're hoping that the committee would consider increasing that temporary period from 2 years to 4 years so that enables and facilitates appropriate lease agreement between Honda dealership and the owner. 2 years simply will not, advance appropriate lease agreement. And in this particular situation, I think it would probably undermine or compromise appropriate lease agreement between the two parties.
Staff, would you like to speak to that?
Staff's preference would be to take more of a precautionary approach to ensure that all landscape works are fulfilled to the satisfaction of the manager of open space and our director of development services. So we feel that the 2 year temporary period is more appropriate. There have been three previous approvals granted by the committee for temporary periods of 5 years, and we just like to ensure that all these works are fulfilled and implemented to our satisfaction. So we feel that 2 years is more appropriate.
In understanding where you're coming from in staff's perspective, I just, from a business sense, I do tend to agree with the applicant. If they're in contravention, they're in contravention, whether it's a 2 year or 4 or 3 or whatever discussion item. So, but being the area and not being in an area of high transition from my perspective, it's not in an area that, and maybe staff can speak to that, is there anything that is of impeding significance of change in that area, or? Unlike a northwest Brampton or northeast Brampton that may have, applications forthcoming and so forth. There's nothing that.
Well, I think the more central point is that there's been repeated extensions of this variance, and staff would like to see those outstanding issues corrected, and so it's a persistent issue.
Understood.
So notwithstanding the submission by the applicant, there's a concern around the approvals that are being issued for what's becoming a more apparently a permanent use without the appropriate remediation measures. They would come back presumably at the end of 2 years and seek a further extension and confirm that all the outstanding issues have been resolved. That's our position.
Okay. Mr. Chung?
Mr. Chairman, having dealt with these variances in the city of Brampton in front of you, Mr. Chairman, I do recognize that there are certain circumstances where, staff come back with a very short temporary period because, it's a transition or it's a temporary use for something ultimately going to happen on that site. We're dealing with a property in a mature industrial precinct. This property is not evolving to something more permanent. It is an existing permanent industrial property with an existing industrial building. Yes, over time, there's been temporary applications filed to utilize the vacant backyard to this property for Honda dealership. But I think in hearing staff's concern about why 2 years, I would think that condition number 6 would have satisfied that if the applicant or the owner is not fulfilling the conditions, there is a condition that's been put onto this, which I am not debating, that would make this application null and void. So condition number 1 is not about, in my opinion, testing the water if the applicant or the owner is going to clear the conditions, because there's a specific time frame to each condition to be fulfilled. I think condition number 1 is simply, in my opinion, is the use of a condition where staff feel on certain other locations where there's a transition and evolution of an ultimate development, but allows something temporary in nature to bridge the gap. In this particular situation, we're dealing with a totally different circumstance, Mr. Chairman. This is a mature industrial precinct with an existing developed industrial property, and the owner is simply looking to maximize utilization of a vacant backyard.
Ms. Stoffler?
Through you, Mr. Chair. One question to the city. Is there an order to comply on the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I don't believe that there is.
Okay, and a second question is to the applicant. The question before us, has it taken 5 years to get to this point, or how has there not been any communication between the owner and the city? In other words, when you filed this application, you're now bringing forward conflicting information, as it were. Was there an attempt at discussions with the city and trying to resolve this prior to us meeting today?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. Until the application was filed, between 2014 and the application was filed and seeing the staff report, because there was zero communication, we fought, leading up to this staff report, we were always of the understanding and confirmation that the previous variance that was approved with conditions were all fulfilled. So the variance that was granted in 2014 for 5 years, were satisfied because all the conditions have been confirmed to be fulfilled. So there was no communication between that time until leading up to today, because if there was conditions still remaining, we would have been notified that the previous variance would have been null and void. So only time we come to the understanding that staff who wrote this current staff report were not aware of the previous discussions was when we saw the conditions, the report released on Thursday. We followed up with the planning department before this report was written to make sure that we can coordinate appropriate conditions. So only chance that I had to actually remark on these conditions was today. We followed up with staff after the release of this report to chat about these conditions, and we failed to do so because we never got a call back.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll ask the same question to the city in terms of understanding concerns over this property. Is it only because of the application in front of us today?
Sorry, there were conditions of the previous approvals that had similar conditions as are before you today, that the applicant implemented the landscape works and site works as per the approved landscape and site plan. So there has been a concern in the past where the applicant has failed to implement these site works and maintain them. All the conditions before you today suggest that the applicant implement the site works and consider them to be to the satisfaction of the manager of open space and development. But there's nothing within these conditions that would have the applicant be required to maintain those landscape works. So with the temporary period, we want to ensure that those landscape works are maintained and implemented. And we want to make sure after the review of the 2-year period that is still remains to be the case.
Just I have not had discussions with the applicant in advance. The planner went out and did a site check and found outstanding issues that are current outstanding issues that are matters of concern, and so the report reflects the current situation on the ground, and it would have been our expectation, as the issue had been raised previously, that these matters, like the applicant, would have exercised diligence to make sure those matters were properly addressed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be that we defer this. I don't know if applicant and city would be willing to do that, but I don't feel it's beholden on the committee to try to interpret what has transpired. It seems at the very least that there's a misinterpretation, and some conversation might be beneficial rather than leave the committee with a decision to either affect the property owner's business transaction or the city's desire to implement something that is feasible and for a longer period of time.
You can put forward a motion to that effect. Mr. Chung, just for clarity though, I want to just get a clear understanding. These conditions are put forward by staff as recommendations. Do you understand and accept all those conditions? And if not, which ones are we debating?
Well, I think I got clarity on record by staff's response on condition number 3 and 4 that they understand that there may have been some further correspondence between the owner and the city, and we're prepared to accept the condition 3 and 4, recognizing that There are going to be some research back on the history of these conditions, and we're satisfied with that. We just want to put on record that there's further discussions. The only one that I'm seeking to actually amend is the temporary nature of the condition for 2 years, and seeking an appropriate addition to 2 years to 4 years so that we can have a proper facilitation of a lease agreement arrangement between Honda dealership and the owner.
Yeah, and that's what my understanding, but I just wanted to get clarity from yourself. So conditions 2 to 6 are not being debated, it is just your request to maintain the 5, or you had indicated the 4-year. And staff's made it clear that they're more comfortable with the 2-year. Mr. Freeman, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Any other questions or motions or anything else that staff, committee would like to put forward?
I could support 4 years, given that there is one condition that would pull the plug on the approval. And so what would happen after 1 year if the applicant were found not to be in compliance?
I tend to agree. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just a comment through you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Mr. Nurse's comments, but at the same time, I do, after listening all the conversation and the comments, I do agree with Ms. Doffler as well that we've been put up on this situation to, and as you mentioned previously, as a business, we understand the nature of the leases and how it's hard to work around those scenarios. I applaud staff's work, and I know Ms. Jenkins were dealing the file previously, but at this point, I truly believe that there should be more communication between the owner and the city so they can clearly have these things understanding in a better way. So we, moving forward, even after 2 years or after 4 years, as a committee, we are not in the same situation because of many times it was on the temporary uses were granted. After listening to everyone, I am, if all parties agrees and they wish to defer the application on a later date, not too long, so at least we can work it out on all these things, I'm willing to support that one as well. But at the same time, with due respect to staff, I do understand what are your concerns, and I truly feel that. But I wish to support 4 years temporary period, given the fact that the condition number 6 is already there to look after those things. Okay.
Okay. If there are no further comments or questions, seeking a motion to proceed, any committee member?
So motion to support the application with condition 1 amended to 4 years.
Okay. Any questions, concerns? Seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All in favor? That carries. That is approved for 4 years, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Obviously, as indicated, conditions 2 to 4 highlight the fact that there's ongoing discussions that will be necessary for site plan clarification.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling application A19023, Daniel Barina. Property is located at 21 Roberts Crescent.
Morning.
Good morning. Just your name and address for the record, sir?
It's Daniel Barina. Address is 21 Roberts, Brampton, Ontario, L6W1G9.
And anything that you'd like to add? We have all the information in front of us, but anything you'd like to indicate or highlight for the benefit of the
I
committee?
can put some shrubs out if it helps. Seemed to be a point of contention the last one, so.
Well, as long as you
Other than
maintain.
that, I got a growing family. We need the space to do a nice master bedroom. Love the area. A lot of the neighbors have done it. See, he's getting really upset that it might not get approved. He really wants that master bedroom, so. Yeah, just hopefully we'll get approved and I can go forward with the building permit process.
You're trying to force our hand, I see.
Every little bit helps.
Absolutely. Well, I do appreciate, though, the fact that you did mention building permit process, because it's not indicated here. However, it is innately a necessity, but we'll have staff speak to that as well. Any questions by committee members on the item? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff reviewed the application and support tests outlined in the Planning Act and are recommending approval subject to 2 conditions. Condition 1, that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. And condition 2, that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee will render the approval null and void.
Thank you. And like as I indicated, sometimes we do include the building permit condition. However, Ms. Corzola, oftentimes we also have the discussion that it's necessary regardless, correct?
It's necessary regardless, and typically when we include it as a condition, it's because it's already been built.
Correct.
Here it has not, it's simply proposed, and a permit, as always, would be required.
Okay. Any comments? Motion to approve by Mr. Nurse. Seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? That carries. That is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Calling application A19024, Wen Yu Dong. Property is located at 84 Lockwood Road.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sabir Mohammed. I will be speaking on behalf of Wen Yu Dong, who is my father-in-law. This property is for 84 Lockwood Road, and we are requesting a minor variance on the side door and the existing shed as well. Our father-in-law gifted us this property 2 years ago for our wedding gift to help us with the the down payment for the house. And unfortunately, we did not know the side door did not have a permit, nor did the shed have a permit. In fact, we didn't know anything about owning a house since we are new house owners, and unfortunately, it seemed that none of those had a permit, and we just need a permit for the 2 items there. And the requirement, I believe, is 0.9 meters from the stairs, end of the stairs to the property line, and we are at 0.85, so just a 5-centimeter difference. And we were hoping we could really get this minor variance approved so we can get the building permit to approve our side door as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments by committee members?
Currently a second unit in the dwelling?
No more, no.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff have reviewed this application and are in support subject to the following conditions. Number 1, that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. Number 2, that the owner obtain a building permit within 60 days of the date of the committee's final decision. Number 3, that the above-grade entrance shall not be used to access an unregistered second unit, and that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the application null and void.
Thank you, sir. Sir, have you had an opportunity to read those conditions and understand?
I did, yes.
And agree to them?
I did, 100%.
Okay, so I want to highlight, just because, as you mentioned, as a new property owner, the building permit process is required.
Yes.
That may require changes. That's building code. That's beyond the scope of this committee. So there may be modifications, perhaps yes or perhaps no, just so that you're clear on that.
Yes, I do apologize for interrupting, but yes, we did go ahead with the building permit process first. That's how we found out we needed the variance.
Okay.
We were almost pretty much done, but then before it got approved, they're like, wait a minute, it's 0.85.
They
so
highlighted the fact that they were working.
And then, so I just got, I guess, if it gets approved, just go back to them and it should be okay.
Excellent. And I also want to highlight condition 3, the fact that Mr. Crouch somewhat brought it up, is that this is not to be used as an unregistered second unit.
No, not at all.
That will then nullify this.
By that, you mean having people live there, or we cannot use it ourselves?
No. As a rental,
Oh, okay.
a secondary unit. And just I highlight that because in the event that is found to be used as a secondary unit, that will nullify this. Condition 4 will nullify it.
No, I understand that, yes.
Okay, just wanted to highlight that. Any questions by committee members? Seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve with conditions.
Motion to approve with conditions by Mr. Chada, seconded by Ms. Doffler. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Sir, I have one question. So
Yes.
Am I getting a document, or is it going to be on my file, or how do I proceed with the building?
Sir, Through you, Mr. Chair, a copy of the notice of decision rendered today will be provided to you by mail and correspondence.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And just for clarity, there is a 20-day appeal period that if someone from the public may appeal this, so that is a process that has to be fulfilled before this becomes in effect, if you will, correct, Mr. Roach?
Okay. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, follow up with staff, they'll always be very helpful with that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Calling application A19025, Ali Beba. Property is located at 23 Leopard Gate. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just recalling, I had a telephone call this morning from the agent who, due to weather conditions, indicated he would not be in attendance this morning.
Okay, we'll put the application at the end in the event something changes, and then we'll deal with that if the committee's indulgence at this point in time.
Chair, to you, I guess we can put at the end, but I guess the conversation was already that they're not gonna be able to make it today, so maybe we can just defer to the further date.
It's to the indulgence of committee. What would you
Just
like?
through you, Mr. Chair, to Secretary Treasurer, is there any date the agent requested, Ms. Myers, during the conversation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the agent didn't indicate a specific date. He did clearly indicate, however, that he would not be attending today.
So, Mr., would you like to just put something forward, Mr. Chana?
Sure, we can, it's based on all the committee decision, but if the next meeting will be appropriate, then I'd like to defer to the next meeting.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Secretary Treasurer, can we deal with it today in his absence? Staff report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is at the discretion of the committee if they want to proceed in the absence of the applicant or the agent.
Hi, through you, Mr. Chair, I understand what Mr. Crouch is coming from, and I can see the staff report, but given the fact that they already called in advance and the weather condition, I think it would be appropriate if we defer to the next meeting, as we have seen in the previous time. People did not show up, and we still give them that flexibility.
So it's to the discretion of committee. Is there a motion required?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we're deferring this to a subsequent hearing, I'm just advising that March 5th would not be a problem, given the fact that there won't be any changes to this particular application.
So would you like to put a motion forward, Mr. Chana, for the March 5th meeting?
Motion to defer application A19-025 to the March 5th hearing.
Do we have a second there? Seconded by Ms. Stoffler. All in favor? That carries. That is deferred to the March 5th meeting. Understanding where Mr. Crouch is coming from as well.
Calling application A19026, Jagar and Shah and Sia Jagar Shah. The property is located at 12 Peregrine Grove.
Good morning, members. I'm here to represent Mr. and Mrs. Shah. My name is Jiftesh Bela from Noble Elite Solutions for 12 Peregrine Grove.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just didn't catch the name. I know the company, but not the name.
It's Jiftesh Bela, G-I-V-T-E-S-H. So my client wants to do an extension on his existing property. This property is located in the Professor's Lake area with the beautiful backyard backing to a Professor's Lake. So their family is growing, so they wanted to do some extension. And they're extending above the existing garage, so they'll be keeping the same footprint. While we were doing minor variance application for this extension, we discovered that we also need minor variances for the existing deck. And there was existing deck on the side yard going to the above grade entrance. And we have seen the staff recommendations. I'll talk more about it after hearing recommendations from the staff.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions for the agent? Any comments? Seeing none. Anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Sir, would you like to come step forward?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Paul Lorimer, and my property is, the rear of my property joins the rear of the property. On
Mr.
Peregrine.
Lorimer, just, I don't want to interrupt you. I do have your written submittal as well. That will be submitted for the record, but the floor is yours. It was a very informative and well-written piece as well.
Oh, thank you very much. So I just wanted to, I'll be brief, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. First of all, the neighborhood that we're in by Professor's Lake is a little bit unique. Peregrine Grove runs parallel to Peaceful Place, which is the street we're on, and there's about a dozen neighbors whose backyards back onto each other, and both little dead-end courts come off Philosopher's Trail. And the Philosopher's Trail is considerably higher, so you've got a runoff down towards Professor's Lake of water. And you've also got beautiful sight lines. Where the neighbors are on their decks or in their backyards, they can see the lake, and that's part of the enjoyment of living near Peaceful Place or near the lake there. So our concern, well actually, let me not say concerns. There's 5 requests for variance. And 5 of the 7 requests we support, and there's only 2 that we're concerned about. And those 2 that we're concerned about is number 5 and number 6. So let me just briefly highlight those, although I realize that there has been a written thing submitted. And I would like to say that we are getting on harmoniously with our neighbor. And my concerns here are to do with bylaws as opposed to I don't have issues with the neighbor at all. But when they moved in, a small deck was replaced by a much larger deck, and then some concrete pad was added in the backyard, and a whole bunch of things came up against the fence at that point, including a shed that was quite close. And I spoke to the neighbors and said that there is a runoff of swale through the backyard that along the fences that permits runoff, and I'd requested that they sort of honor that half-meter requirement so that water could run and it could be graded, because what was happening is the water, their area was built up, water was standing in our backyard, which is a risk, and the back end of our property was muddy. It wouldn't even grow sod. And it was a bit of a health risk too, having standing water there. So so the stuff away from the stuff at the fence was moved. However, gardens were put in. So where that 0.6 meter gap is supposed to be in the grading, so there could be water runoff down to the lake instead of kind of ponding in our backyard, the shed kind of blocks it. The grading doesn't go down. And then some planter boxes are put in right along the fence. So there is an issue with the grading and with the request for a shed to be 0.1 meter away because it sits right in the area that's supposed to be a runoff. And then that's 0.5. 0.6 about a deck and requesting an encroachment to permit a deck and landing in the rear yard to encroach into the required 6.799 meter legal non-complying rear yard by a depth of 4.977 meters. So there's a request for 5 meter non-compliance. Now, houses here are small. Ours is 1,400 square feet. Our neighbor's deck and our deck are such that we could throw a ball back and forth and catch it. Wouldn't be wise with all the windows, but nonetheless, we're that close. And so I'm concerned about this 5 meter non-complying area. This is called a minor variance, but if you live there, it's pretty major with 2 small properties. And so when my wife and I moved into the neighborhood, we put a deck on. We wanted a large deck. We got bylaw approval for it, and it had to be smaller than we wanted. And basically, we feel that all of the neighbors on this area should work within the bylaw requirements. Sight lines are important, living on Peaceful Place and Peregrine Grove. All of the neighbors have chain link fence. There's no wooden fences. There's nothing interrupting the sight lines at the moment, despite the neighborhood being about 35 years old. And so we're concerned about this, which to us is a very large non-compliance and affecting sight lines and and we're concerned about the mudding and the lack of water running through the backyard. So because I've made a written submission, I won't go any further, and I do appreciate the process you have and the ability to speak into it and for neighbors to be advised, so thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. And I want to get some clarity from staff because as to condition 6, I believe there is an encroachment, as obviously it's a variance, but I don't believe the numbers are as indicated. So I'll just get some clarity on that when staff
Sure.
is speaking. So we may have just some interpretation of that. Sir, anything you'd like to add at this point in time?
I've looked into the staff recommendations. They've already refused number 5 variances, which you had concerns about, so we will be relocating that shed as per the recommendations. And number 6 is for the setback for the deck. Now, the deck's already there, so removing at this point would be basically demolishing the whole deck and bringing it back to the required setback condition. Now, again, we'll hear the staff recommendations, and I'll talk more about this number 6 point as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any comments by committee members? Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, staff, committee, no? Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please? And as indicated, there is a written submission by Mr. And Mrs. Lorimer from 26 Peaceful Place.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, as has been discussed, staff are partially in support of this application, subject to the following conditions. That variance 5, to permit the existing accessory structure having a setback of 0.1 meters be refused, and the applicant relocate the accessory structure to comply with the requirements of the zoning bylaw within 60 days of the date of the committee's decision. That the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. That the owner shall obtain a building permit for the rear yard deck within 60 days of the date of the committee's final decision. That the above-grade entrance shall not be used to access an unregistered second unit. And that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void. And just to speak a bit more to variance 6, I think variance 5 we're fairly all in agreement here, but variance 6, the one discussion that I would like to have is that the major encroachment into the rear yard has to do with the staircase and the landing rather than the deck itself. As I noted here, the deck itself actually has a rear yard setback of 3.37 meters, according to the sketch attached, which would only be a 40 centimeter encroachment into the required rear yard. So bearing in mind that they do have to make the variance for the staircase and the landing, it's our opinion that the impact on the neighbor's property that will be caused by that variance is going to be significantly reduced based on the fact that the majority of that encroachment is the staircase and landing rather than the deck itself. And the usage of a staircase and landing is such that they're not going to have the same type of privacy concerns, as that is basically used to access the rear yard rather than kind of sit and congregate. And based on the major grade changes on the lot and the design of the deck, it would be quite difficult for that staircase and landing to go on the other side of the deck, which could bring it more into conformity. So that is kind of where we come from with our recommendation of approval of that variance.
And I'd just like to speak to Mr. Lorimer had spoken about the encroachment, and he had indicated a 5 meter encroachment. From the way I interpret this is the 5 meter, the 4.99 is the allowable use, is that correct? And what is the encroachment is 6.799, resulting in the 1.8. Is that a correct interpretation of the numbers?
Almost.
Okay.
So the required, so the deck is permitted to encroach 3 meters into the required rear yard. The required rear yard in this case is 6.799 meters. So they can encroach 3 meters into that, so leaving a setback of 3.799. In this case, they are encroaching almost 5 meters. So it's a 2 meter additional encroachment. And as my colleague Daniel had mentioned, it is
for the staircase.
Primarily for the landing that is at the staircase. The straight run of stairs actually would be permitted. So if it had come straight down rather than made that turn near the bottom of the staircase, it would be compliant with the zoning bylaw, with the exception of, I think it was 40 centimeters of the deck itself in the one corner. The majority of the deck complies with the 3-meter allowable encroachment into the rear yard. It's really just the landing and a small corner of the deck proper, if you will.
And that's
that
what I
doesn't
wanted
comply.
clarity on, because the numbers are all over the place.
Yeah.
Just, if, I don't know if that helps, Mr. Larimore, is that there is obviously an encroachment, but not as, the magnitude as when you were discussing. Is that clearer?
Yes, that's very helpful, thank you. And I apologize that I misunderstood what it was asking for. So if the issue is the deck itself is 40 centimeters offside, I will not object to that. I'm not concerned about a 40 centimeter on the deck which is now existing. So I would withdraw that comment and that concern. And then I'll leave it to the city to deal with the steps and these other issues. But I did misunderstand, so I withdraw that part.
That's what I wanted clarity for, because
Yes.
even ourselves with all those numbers, it's quite misleading or difficult to interpret. So
Yeah.
I appreciate
I read it about 8 times, but I guess I needed to do 9.
We often read it 10 times, but then we have Ms. Corazzola interpret it for us.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for added comfort, one of the conditions does include that it be maintained in the way you see it currently, so there would be no allowable expansion or increase in the encroachment for either the landing or a portion of the deck in the future.
Thank you. Sir?
And it will also be a safety issue just to leave the landing over there, because it kind of gives you a landing in the middle, let's say, and rather than coming all the way down to the grade. And that's just a big height. If somebody falls from the top, it will go all the way to the bottom.
No, I
At least we
understand.
have somewhere in the middle.
I think from my, this is just my, I think staff has done a great job of working with the applicant, and I think the neighbor's been very understanding and respectful of the process as well. So that's just a few comments at this point in time. Any other comments, Mr. Crouch?
Chair, staff, there's no mention of the swale. Is that a part of the drainage plan for this property, and should it be restored?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not 100% aware of any concerns for the swale itself. One of the concerns in general for setbacks of accessory structures and that to the rear yard is drainage. But I haven't had the chance to look at approved plans from when the subdivision was originally built, which is where that where plans for the swale would have been originally. But it's our opinion that if the accessory structure is moved back to come into conformity, that those drainage concerns should be largely addressed.
So the planters that Mr. Lorimer mentioned and the concrete pad are not problems? Does the concrete pad have to be removed when the shed is removed?
So I believe that the concrete pad that is being referred to in the written submission has to do with below the deck. Any pad that the accessory structure might be sitting on would also have to be moved with the accessory structure. Does that answer
Mr. Crouch, if you may indulge me, is I think your point is, and that's what I was thinking the whole time, and this is something that I like to put forward, is that in condition 1, we include the verbiage that the accessory structure is to be removed, and oftentimes we do include the fact that the swale or the drainage is verified, so perhaps to conform to what was originally intended. Is that something that Ms. Corazzola or Sir that we would like to or be able to add that verbiage?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you're going to condition it that they remove any concrete pad, and I'm honestly not sure if there is a concrete pad under there.
Yeah.
Typically, the zoning bylaw would not address the pad itself. Any paving in the rear yard that's less than 2 feet off the ground is considered a landscape deck, and there are no restrictions
Absolutely.
required. Issues of drainage and any requirement for altering drainage would be addressed through our Public Works Department rather than through the zoning bylaw. But certainly to add a condition that any associated concrete pad with this shed also be removed would be more than appropriate.
But if we put that in,
yeah,
with respect, Mr. Chair, that wouldn't determine that a swale would
Not
be
necessarily.
restored.
You would need an additional condition that grading and drainage
The
be
graded and
restored to the satisfaction of the
absolutely.
commissioner.
That's what I'm looking for.
As we had on the credit review road application some months ago.
Correct.
Sir, do you understand what I'm asking at this point in time?
Yes, I do understand. I'm just, I just would like to say something about this shed at the back. The shed is less than 100 square feet, so legally we don't really need any building permit for something this small. So we can relocate the shed to a place where it doesn't interfere with any drainage. So that is something I would accept, or my client would accept. And we have no issues with it. Like, we'll meet the setback requirements and also make sure that it doesn't interfere with any drainage issues at all for the property or the adjacent property.
And just so you understand, the intent of my request is not really pertaining to concrete slab or even shed per se.
Yeah.
It's just that we have the manager of public works or whomever from staff verify that the grading is adequate and has not been altered from its original state.
Okay.
Something along those lines, and perhaps the wording can be worked on, but that's really what we want to make sure is that everyone, in particular because your client is going through a major construction process, I would be a little bit onerous if it was just that one thing perhaps, but just a verification.
Okay, this, because most of the renovations are done on the front
Absolutely,
side
yes,
of the
understood.
property, and then this is actually extending on the existing footprint of the house. And
If there's nothing been altered, there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
And that's really where my mindset is on that.
Okay.
Is that something that you would be able to agree to?
Yeah, we can agree on the shed portion or the grading issue in the rear yard. We can do that as well, like that. I don't have any issues with it.
And staff, perhaps you can help me with the wording on a condition that would satisfy that. Just basically that the swale is maintained and that any alteration is rectified to its original state or something along those lines.
Certainly, and I will provide an offering for your consideration through the chair. And I think I'm going to suggest it be introduced as condition number 2, so that in addition to the removal of the shed, any associated concrete pad shall be removed, and that grading and drainage be restored and maintained to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Engineering.
And so the concrete pad that's underneath the deck, does that apply to that as well, even though it's not part of the...
From my perspective, it's not, but staff, would you like to, as long as it's not impeding on the grading and the swale?
That's correct. At this point, there's no indication that the concrete pad rather under the deck causes any kind of drainage issue. It's not near enough to the lot line and typically would be permitted as a paved patio in that area.
Mr. Lorimer, are you looking to speak?
Yes, I support what has just been said by staff here, and I just wanted to comment on the swale about restoring it to how it was. We've been at our house 17 years, and there was a fairly strong grading. There's a name for this, I can't think of it, but anyhow, the water runs down the middle. And 2 to 3 years ago, that from the property that these neighbors now have, a lot of dirt was put to fill in their side of the swale so that it no longer functioned. So what it meant is all the water ran onto our side. So I like the condition because simply moving the shed doesn't deal with the swale and the water runoff, and it's going to leave us in mud. So I think I support what is being said here too. And if whatever the requirements are for the property for runoff are met, I think that should meet our concerns because the property is now flat and it should be going like this, and then water can run instead of pond on our property and become mud. So I'm very I'm pleased with this amendment here.
So, any other comments? And if not, sir, do you understand and agree to all the conditions?
Yeah, I do.
Including the amended condition as well?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Additional,
yes.
Additional.
Any?
Motion to approve with the additional condition and the other conditions.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Nurse. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir, with the added condition.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Calling application A19027, Kelly Hughes, properties located at 51 Frederick Street.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Good morning, sir.
I'm here asking for a permit on a minor variance of an interior yard setback of 1.7 meters where the bylaw is 1.07 meters where the bylaw is 1.2, a difference of about 5.5 inches to go along with our existing house.
Very self-explanatory. Thank you. Any comments by committee members to the, owner or just agents?
Owner.
Owner? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff have reviewed the application, and in our opinion, it meets the four tests in establishing the Planning Act, and we recommend that the following conditions be imposed. One, that the owner finalize site plan approval under City File SB 18-167 to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services. Two, that the extent of the variances be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice. Three, that the use of the accessory building labeled as to be removed on the sketch attached to the public notice be limited to the storage of tools and materials for use in connection with construction on the main building, and that the accessory building be removed within 60 days of the completion of that construction or within 1 year of the date of the committee's approval of this application, whichever is earlier, unless an extension is granted by the Director of Development Services. And four, that failure to comply with and maintain the condition of the committee shall render the approval null and void.
Thank you. Sir, have you had an opportunity to review those conditions?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
And
We were
you-
going to take down the structure anyways, we're just using it temporarily.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to approve with staff conditions.
Motion to approve with staff conditions as by Mr. Kraus, seconded by Ms. Doffler. All in favor? That carries. That is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my architect did the paperwork there. Thank you.
Time flies.
Calling application A19028, Jazz Creek Grewal and Gurmeet Grewal. The property is located at 33 Coin Street.
Back again, Jeff Tishbell again from Noble Elite Solutions, here to represent Mr. and Mrs. Grewal on 33 Coin Street. This was applied as a minor variance for the deck that was on the side of the property to going into their above grade side entrance, which was supposed to be used for a second unit dwelling. Now, so initially we applied for building permits, and there were some grading errors that was made in the beginning when we applied for building permit for second unit. Just give you a little bit of a background on this, and then but when the contractors started working on it, they cut the door, they put the deck, and nobody informed nobody. And then once the inspections were called, and that's when it was realized that there was a big grade difference, what was on the building permit drawings and what was in the field. So now the door's already there, the deck's built, and we were hoping if we could keep that deck as is, and I'm not sure if this staff has now staff has refused this application, but I was hoping if we could still keep that door and not use it as a second unit dwelling, just leave it for the entrance and exit for the upstairs use, and then we propose some other entrance for the second unit, because it's already there, the money has been spent, and we'll propose something else for the second unit.
Okay. Thank you. Committee members, any questions or comments? Mr. Crouch?
Chair, have you read the staff report about the current situation?
Yes, I have.
So, the official plan explicitly states that where an application for a second unit fails to conform to any of the requirements of the implementing zoning bylaw, a zoning bylaw amendment shall be required.
Yes.
This committee can't help you.
Yes.
That zoning bylaw amendment is a decision of the City Council, not the Committee of Adjustment.
Yeah, so this is why I was, Mr. Chair, this is why I was proposing that that door, if it is used for the personal use, then this comes under minor variance, not under bylaw amendment.
I'll wait for some staff comments. Thank you.
Okay. Any others? No. Anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Seeing none, we do have a letter of support, I believe.
Of support on the street
Yeah.
opposite.
Yep, okay, just in support of the application. Just, that'll be submitted for the record. Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff reviewed the application and support tests as outlined in the Planning Act, and as mentioned, I'm recommending that the application be refused. I would just like to add that our engineering group has raised some concerns with respect to the approved drainage design for the property and that it may be adversely impacted by the construction of the above-grade entrance and associated paving in the side yard. If the committee was to approve the application today, I would just recommend that a condition be added that the applicant demonstrate to the satisfaction of the Director of Engineering that the design for the property has not been adversely impacted as a result of the paving in the side yard.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members to staff? Ms. Toffler?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a question to the city. The applicant mentioned that if this is not for a second unit, if it's just for personal use, does that then fall under a minor variance?
It does fall under a minor variance. I'm not going to comment on the official plan because I think planning staff has covered it and certainly been summarized by Member Crouch as well. But through you, Mr. Chair, the variances have actually been identified in two parts. So the first part, which is a landing that is more than 0.6 meters above the ground with stairs leading up and down, that is the permission that would be specific to the creation of a second unit, because they are permitted a deck in the side yard, or a landing rather, to serve a principal entrance to the second unit, as long as it's not more than 0.6 meters above ground. The second part is actually a variance to the general residential provisions, which would apply to any stairs or any decks and landings in an interior side yard, similar to the stairs that we had in an earlier application here that were just 5 centimeters too close to the side lot line, whereas this one is about a foot from the side lot line and 3 feet is the requirement. So you can either choose to refuse variance 1, and if you see fit to allow the landing to stay, approve variance 2. If you do approve variance 2, I would recommend that you condition it such that the stairs and landing shall not be used as the principal access to a secondary unit, because that would require a variance to condition 1 or variance 1. So that's really the difference. Stairs and landings are restricted in the general provisions, whereas stairs and landings for a secondary unit are specifically in the implementing provisions for the official plan amendment, or the official plan policy that's referenced in the staff report.
And in terms of the engineering concerns?
That is another consideration for you to decide whether or not you would even consider approving it as a variance to the general provisions, whether in any other circumstance you would consider that as being appropriate given the concerns expressed by engineering staff.
Thank you.
Any other questions by committee members? I have a question to the agent. So just for clarity though, the intentions of the applicant is then to put in a secondary unit and proceed with the application process of a secondary unit, correct?
That is correct. So we will propose something alternate to what this is for the second unit.
Okay.
Proceed.
And however, as Mr. Crouch indicated, being in contravention of the OP, but this is not the intent of your of the owners to use it as the entrance to the accessory unit.
Yes, so initially we thought this comes under minor variance because when we applied for this application, the city staff did not flag us right there that, do not apply for this because there would be a bylaw amendment or something, right? So initially when we submitted, we thought we could apply for minor variance in relation to the zoning, and getting some relief from the conditions that are already there. So now we do know, or like the owner or me, myself, I do understand that this area over here, we cannot sorry, I'm going to rephrase myself here. So I do understand that this is not the right place for what we are asking for, to include this, to have this entrance for a second unit, but we would still like to leave that entrance over there for personal use because it's already there. Everything's done by the code, even the structure, everything is done according to the building requirements and even the deck and stuff. But
Understanding, and this is just my opinion again, understanding where the applicant is coming from, but I tend to agree with staff at this point in time, is that if the intention is to proceed with the process, you need to find another entrance anyway.
Yes.
Thus, that becomes an enforceable nightmare to verify that entrance being used for the accessory apartment or not. So from my point of view, is if you're going to go through the right process, which I do applaud your owner for going through the applicant for going through the process, this just becomes a difficulty from our perspective or city's perspective to enforce. So I would be more inclined to support staff at this point of view from that perspective. But again, I'll leave it to committee for any other questions or comments on that.
Yeah, I was just, sorry.
Yeah, oh, I understand, and listen, I agree with, you came with the philosophy of trying to maintain something once it's built, but I think it just becomes very difficult and we see it all the time.
Yeah.
And I tend to actually generally support these, however, on the other side, there's not much space. The up and down is always a great alternative, but from this point of view, I just can't support it at this point of view. Okay. Any other comments? Questions? Okay, seeking a motion to proceed. Okay, motion to support staff recommendations and refusal of the application. Seconded by Ms. Doppler. All in favor? That carries. This application is refused. You do have the right for the 20-day appeal period if your applicant or if your owners are looking for that as well.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Calling application A19-029, 10254 Your Ontario Property Inc., located at 10254 Your Ontario Street.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Kurt Franklin. I'm a planner with Weston Consulting. A colleague of mine was before you last August, I believe it was, creating for a consent application to create a new lot on this property at 10254. The intent of that lot was to have the heritage building that was currently located on 10254 to be relocated to this new lot. It was in accordance with plans that were approved by both Heritage Committee and with Council, and we have been proceeding with city staff working our way through the site plan process for approvals on that. Unfortunately, as we progress through a capital works, have requested now an additional road widening, which has caused a minor variance condition, and which is what we're seeking relief for today. 9 meters is the front yard, which we very painstakingly located the building at the very beginning of the process. Unfortunately now, well, even though the building has not moved, it will be 7.5 meters given the change to the property boundary. We're seeking relief from that from you today. We feel it's appropriate, meets the 4 test. We are at the very end of a site plan process. The visual imaging from the street will be just as was originally intended when we had a 9 meter, and we're pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, I do have one question, but this may be staff. Is the road widening, is there something that, other than the fact of obtaining the road widening, is there something of significance that will be going into that road widening at that location?
No, the road widening is strictly, unless Bindu would like to answer this, was as we were told by staff was to regularize the road widening in that corridor through there. The road widening as it was originally agreed to by transportation had a bit of a jag to it and was not a uniform stretch across there. This was an attempt then for Capital Works to request us to regularize that, to realign the northwestern, eastern property of our boundary to the site to the north as well, so that we have future development in that corridor when it will be rebuilt potential for the bus rapid transit or the widening of the road. It would be easier for the city to work with.
Okay, and I'll provide that or ask that question again to staff as well. Any other comments or questions by committee members? Is there anyone in the audience here to speak on this application? Sir?
Hi, I'm Mark Kemper. I'm from the neighboring property at 10370 here Ontario Street. I'd just like to talk to this setback. I own the property beside, and there's been a bunch of changes to this property. Obviously, it's not necessarily the heritage.
Is your property to the north?
South of us.
To the south?
Like, so this property that we're talking about?
This property is to the south of your property?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, this is a 74-acre property that's been chopped up and changed. And, we haven't had any problems with anything. This particular setback does impede the visual look of our property. We're worried about not being able to see our property and not being able to see the signage. Related to, this 1.5 meters, that's really what it is. I can't see how this can't be taken into consideration in this property, as sketched out here. So I just don't think that this is appropriate.
Understood. We'll ask some questions of staff. And from your perspective, it's just the visual component, is it your, just for clarity, are you the storage to the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just the potential impeding of visual from.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like just for signage, I mean, ultimately, the business is tight enough, and I don't want to lose any employment opportunities for people, and I'm just looking at it that way. I just feel like this is such a big property. This can be easily. Everyone else has to work with the setbacks, as what the city, states, and to keep uniformity going. We did when we built too at the same time.
Yeah, and however, this is the process that there are potentially some subjectivity or minor variances as indicated in the title, but we do appreciate your point of view, and this is your opportunity to highlight that.
Okay.
Okay. Committee members, any questions? No, seeing none. Anyone else here to speak on this application? Seeing none. Staff, would you like to weigh in with your comments, please?
Thank you. Through the chair. In answer to that question about the setback, we did look into this. The neighboring property to the north, the one that you see outlined in a light gray saying one-story brick building, is set back quite a distance from the road there. And the heritage house that is proposed is going to be 7.5 meters from the property line. And we did not think that there would be any conflicts in views. However, it is our opinion that the 4 tests have been met in this case for this minor variance application, and we do support this subject to a few conditions. Thank you.
And the conditions are as indicated, the 3 as stated, or as written?
Through the chair, yes, please. Shall I speak then?
Please just highlight that for the.
Yeah, that application A19029 is supportable subject to the following conditions. 1, that the owner secure full site plan approval SP 18-058.000, that the extent of the variance be limited to that shown on the sketch attached to the public notice, and that failure to comply with and maintain the conditions of the committee shall render the approval null and void. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members?
Through you, Mr. Chair, when we approved the 9-meter setback, that was not one of the variances. So the only reason for this is now the setback's been met and somebody else changed their mind and said, whoops, we forgot the road widening.
Through the chair, actually the road widening issue was mentioned from the beginning, but the extent of it, the jag that we just spoke about, that we are just trying to align it now as for the future LRT, whatever goes in that road widening project. So it is, in our opinion, the site plan is still ongoing, the review is still ongoing, and there are still some concerns that need to be addressed. So it's part of the review process. Thank you.
Can you just explain the jag to me? So I mean, it looks to me like the road widening continues to the south. We don't have any information to the north, except edge of gravel. And, so is, where's the road line at at building B, for example?
Trying to just illustrate through you, Mr. Chair, for assistance. So the property in question, and let me see, get the property in question is here, and you'll see this area here is the road widening that's been taken on the property to the north, to the self-storage facility. So the original proposal, I guess, was to take the road widening. That strip in there that you see between those 2 lines is approximately 1.8 meters. So I'm assuming that they're looking now to have a consistent line that gets developed down here on this property. I do want to note as well that while this building on the subject lot to the north is set well back from the street, and that the proposed building, the relocation of the heritage home, will be in front of it, there is another building on that property for which a prior variance was received. It's right at the street frontage, and the variance that was approved allows for a 5-meter setback to the front lot line on the property to the north.
Is that the office and?
I believe it is. There may be storage in these units down the side, but it is the primary location for the administrative operations for that self-storage facility.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions by committee members? Sir, you've seen the conditions that staff has recommended. Are they, you understand and agree to them?
Yes, we are. We agree.
Any other questions? If not, seeking a motion to proceed.
Motion to approve, subject to these recommended conditions.
Okay, by Mr. Crouch, seconded by Mr. Chatham. All in favor? That carries. That is approved.
Thank you, sir.
So just for clarity, sir, if there are still ongoing concerns, there is that 20-day appeal period. But again, just if there is any questions that you'd like to ask from staff, you would be able to clarify with them as well if there's anything that you'd like to highlight.
Okay.
Okay, sir?
Yep.
Thank you.
Calling application A17022, Van Kirk 7080 Inc., and the property is located at 80 Van Kirk Drive.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mark Rogers from John Rogers and Associates for the record. This is a deferred application that's back before you. It was deferred from, well, almost 2 years ago to the day now. The initial application was to permit outdoor storage, fencing in a front yard, and a parking reduction. I was not involved with the file at that time, but was retained subsequent to the deferral. We have met with staff, and my client has taken the route, instead of requesting the variance for the outdoor storage, they have determined that they're going to put a building addition on. The result of the building addition is that some of the existing parking is going to be lost because of the addition. However, in this instance, an M4A 157 special site zone, one of the provisions of the special section 157 zoning is a significantly higher parking requirement than a standard industrial zone. As a result of the total floor area, including the addition, 490 parking spaces would be required in this instance. We are proposing to provide 385. However, if the standard industrial parking requirement were applied to the site, 282 spaces would be required. So we're providing a surplus in relationship to the standard industrial parking requirement, however, a deficit to the special site zoning. It is purely an industrial use. It's a manufacturing facility for curtain wall window systems, and that's the extent of my submissions. We are very close to obtaining site plan approval as identified in staff's comments. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you. I drive by the site very frequently. It's a well-maintained site. Ms. Corozzola, just to highlight the special, is that an industrial prestige zoning, or what's the difference there?
It is an industrial prestige zoning. There are a number of uses permitted in the underlying zone that may require. It is a site-specific parking ratio that is set at 1 for 55 for all floor area, which is, as noted by the applicant, much higher than would any other general manufacturing or industrial parking rate be required. And I can confirm that the numbers provided are accurate.
Any questions by committee members? Seeking a motion to proceed. Just for clarity, sir, there are 2 conditions there. You understand and agree to those conditions?
I do.
Motion to approve by Mr. Nurse. Seconded by Mr. Crouch. All in favor? That carries. That is approved, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further business, seeking a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn by Mr. Crouch. He's halfway out the door. Seconded by Ms. Doppler. All in favor? That carries. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.